is early. Well, it's not that early, 9 a.m. ET. But since we have a relatively packed agenda, I'd like to maybe get started. But before we go into everyone's intro, I can quickly go through all the logistics. So we'll have a very interesting giveaway this time. Well, not very interesting every time GMT, but still wanted to mention that the giveaway is like people who have liked, retweeted the AMA tweet, and then also follow Gas Hero account, and also have listened to the Twitter Space live. So then you'll have a chance to win 1,000 GMT, and then there'll be five lucky winner. So definitely stay here and then have some fun. And maybe just saying, maybe that Jan will mistakenly leak some alpha, but hopefully he doesn't. But yeah, let's get started. Maybe let's just start with the round of intro. Let's start with Jan, like very crispy one, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about Jason and Mike.
Sure. So yes, people know me, and I will mainly just contributing ideas in Gas Hero, and the Gas Hero is leading by John. So I'm mere the servant in this. So passing on to to Jason.
Servant.
Yeah, me too. Me too. A servant. I run Folius Ventures. We support APAC founders who invest in early stage Web3 projects. We were lucky enough to support Stepan and Find Satoshi Lab early, and now also a servant to Gah Hero. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, our beloved investor, Mike. By the way, Folius is also an investor of us too. So Mike, go ahead, please.
Hey, Mike Dudas, founder and general partner at Six Man Ventures. Really excited to be here. And obviously, supporters of Find Satoshi Lab, Jan, Mabel, Stepan and the team, who we were introduced to by Jason. So obviously, thank you very much, Jason, who we've been friends with for a long time. And we invest in early stage projects at the application layer. So, we are looking for use cases of crypto so that we can have fun playing games using apps people love, like the ones this amazing team is producing.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I mean, before we start, we definitely wanted to thank both Jason and Mike's support. Without our beloved investor, we wouldn't be here. So definitely thank you so much. And I'd like to maybe start with some intro about, Gas Hero. I think people have been paying attention about us launching this. So we've been teasing Gas Hero since about 1.5 months ago. And recently we revealed that Gas Hero will be the first social game that we are going to deliver sometime soon. When soon is happening really, really depends on, whoever who is sitting down there in the audience, how fast he produces. So I'm not going to cue him, but he knows. And then we also published the Gas Hero, Genesis Hero design campaign that invites everyone to participate in the UGC design contest to share the 2 million plus GMT pool and the 2% perpetual royalty. So that's definitely something that we would love to call for more submission. We've already received a lot of interesting submission from the community, as well as some of the other like projects and NFTs and games, like NFT projects and games. So definitely stay tuned to see more of them. And we discussed some details about the Gas Hero badge in the Stepan Town Hall last week. And some of you seemed quite interested to dig more. So many reached out via DM on Twitter and Discord to learn about, the more alpha and stuff. So we definitely heard you. We very much appreciate your passionate interest, and this is why we are hosting this AMA now with our co-founder Jan and to our investor Jason, founder of Folius Ventures, and Mike Dudas, the founder of Six Man Ventures. They just introduced themselves. Both of them have been very instrumental throughout the process of our growth. So in this kickoff AMA, we'd like to not only discuss our general thinking behind building this new game and FSL being a social entertainment studio, but also invite the speakers to really shed some light on their view of the application market and trends related to the NFT market, because I think that's exactly the area that you guys been focusing on. So I'd like to start with asking Jason and Mike what types of applications you're looking for in the market and why specific these categories or genres. Let's start with Jason and then Mike.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Mabel. I'm going to keep this pretty short because I think we're all going to delve into the discussion later, but I think for the most part, to see apps, we're sometimes specifically looking for vertical entertainment products with a pretty clear ways of monetization and with cash flow. And when I say vertical, it's specific vertical that, it could be a mahjong game, or it could be something that is very, very much shooter. But all of that has to, pertain to some form of entertainment, whether it's various forms of negative EV betting, whether it's for show off, whether it's for the joke that we make is either for making money or it's either for getting happy times with opposite sex, for example. And I think when it comes to specifically incorporation with Web3, we sort of feel like these products not only have to stand on its own feet, being a pretty good Web2 product to begin with, so that they can compete and actually monetize, but specifically, there are three key features we look for. I think these apps need to some extent, really benefit from leveraging offshore on-chain US dollar. They need to really incorporate, or they really benefit from incorporating token incentives that will help them very much quickly and cheaply build network effect and scale advantage, or they would gain a much bigger economic sort of pie by having a higher tick rate on a huge economy that they build. So to summarize, it's sort of really, really well-built Web2 products that focus on narrow niche sort of vertical entertainment verticals, and then sort of really use Web3 features at those three areas that I talk about.
Got it. I was clicking the emojis because I realized that Jason at this AMA was trying to leverage every single opportunity to try to show their portfolio. So definitely kudos to you. How about you? What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, so I would build upon that to say that, obviously we share much of the same thesis. And, look, building on public blockchains is clearly more challenging, right, than building, on a sort of private technology stack. So, what we're often looking for, and also, by the way, accessing and utilizing, games and apps built on public blockchains is currently difficult. So we're increasingly, looking for simplicity. I think in the last, 2-3 years, we've seen things that were more complex and or more difficult to access, be things that, users kind of shied away from and really never broke out, or, teams building, really complex economies and or really complex on-chain activities simply just haven't been able to get those products to market and turn them into sustainable businesses. So we're looking for like simplicity, and then I think basically another feature of what Jason said, which is why does this need to exist on a blockchain? Why does a token need to exist? Is there some fun and interesting speculative element? You still see casino things and gaming and gambling be a core primitive and reason as to why people want to be doing something on chain. And lastly, is it like truly, does this thing have the potential to interoperate, with kind of like other projects and parts of an ecosystem? We tend to like that. So sort of what I would say is simplicity, interoperability, and some sort of like gaming dynamic that involves the notion of money, because ultimately cryptocurrency is money, and it's why the early-ish adopters, and I think we're still in the early-ish adopter phase, are going to get excited about participating and using these things.
Yep. Thank you, Mike. I definitely echo quite a bit of things that you guys are talking about, primarily on the simplicity side of things, or like being laser focused. I absolutely think for a startup to begin with, like you want it to be very laser focused on just tackling one problem. Like a lot of people would say like, oh, we want to build a platform, but you have to start somewhere. So where do you have the flywheel to begin with, right? That's really, really important. And then I think another thing that you both mentioned quite interesting, is that the game theories, which is like why people are here to go through all of these UI UX challenges and still want to play the games, is because they want to play game theories against each other. So I think it perfectly kind of lead to my question to Jan, which is anything that either Jason or Mike said, you felt like echoing, and then what learning over the past 1.5 years about STEPN could you share with us that led to the ideation of Gas Hero?
Yes, yes. I think we asked the question of where we wanted to be and who we are. I think let's say around a year ago, and I think we coined the idea that we need to build enjoyable product, and that's most important. I think doesn't matter the product life cycle or the bigger cycle with cryptocurrency or the whole macro. Building enjoyable product always relate to the people and the users. So it doesn't matter of which area we're building. We're just building an area that we're good at. For example, in this case, with gamification, AI, lifestyle product or music, right? So I think this is something that we aim to do, and then we will set out and release and do product. Regarding to STEPN, I think the most important learning, I think there are two. I think one is, I think there's three learnings. One is throughout the year and a half we operate, we discovered that we talk about the general theory of relativity is time space being inseparable. You can turn space in time, time in space. So when you are growing, in the rapid growing phase, you always want to pace out, right? You say, okay, I want to extend the time of uptrend as much as possible, meaning that we probably have to give up on space, meaning that we're probably going to do like double earnings, airdrops, a lot of that. And when we are in the plateau phase, then we want to say, all right, so now we want to use space to exchange for more times, meaning that stimulus, right? So to turn things around, again, we run at least two big airdrop to the user to inject stimulus into the economy. So that's one learning, right? So everything just come in cycles. And when the cycle is turning, we have to have appropriate plan for that cycle. And the second learning, I think, is there are two cycles, right? So there are the in-game cycle, which refer to all the in-game NFT tokens, that's within the FSL ecosystems. So we have the in-game cycle, and then we'll have the out-game cycle. So we can control to extend or influence to extend of the in-game cycle, but we cannot control or influence the out-game cycle, being the macro or the industry. So that part we have to think really hard of how can we pace these two at least together, right? So that we want to design better mechanics, right, to facilitate the in-game economy and to have the minimum impact from the external, right? So let's say when the SOL was price crashing, then we actually change all the the NFT prices in GMT, which is one way that we say, okay, we need to minimize the out-game impact to the in-game economy. And so we think very hard of what a better mechanic we can design. This has to come in cycles? Is cycle necessary? Or we can have a better way of start a cycle or reset a cycle, right? So I think that ultimately trigger us into the sort of chasing or designing a totally new mechanics.
Johan, are you done?
Yeah.
Or you're still saying, oh, okay. Yeah, let me know, because I wasn't sure if you're going to add more. But I was going to say, I think you just pointed out something that was absolutely a huge challenge faced by a lot of games. Well, all the games, right? Basically, how do you fix the problem of cycles? And I think that's something we'd love to share with all of you who are sitting here and listening for Alpha, about this, how we think about this problem more, but in the future, maybe not today, one by one a little bit. But I'd like to maybe, talking about challenges of, the games that are facing, I'd like to ask all three of you, what are some of the existing challenges you've seen for the Web3 gaming space? let's again start with Jason.
Well, there's so many. So I think John and Dudas got a bunch to rattle off themselves. Maybe I'll just throw out one, which is most teams have limited time and resources. And when they're building a Web3 game, it's often a tussle. Quality, freshness and innovative edges around gameplay mechanics. And then lastly, incorporating key Web3 features. And those are almost non-overlapping demand and constraint on time and resources. I think if a team decided to do Web3, like it often is almost too taxing for them to tackle all the other two well. So, I think the challenge for most teams and the mistake that I see most teams running into is that they sort of still abide to the same Web2 mantra, which is absolutely crazy production value and the absolutely innovation around the edges. But they sort of don't realize that if you're doing Web3 already, I'm not saying those two can be sacrificed, but getting them to certain bars is probably sufficient. And certain innovation around the Web3 aspects could get them a lot farther along than sort of the innovation around the first two areas. And that's something that I think a lot of teams don't recognize, or they have challenge recognizing.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'll jump on, what Jason said, obviously agree with. And then, two additional ones are, and we already talked about them a little bit, but obviously UI, UX. So there's a lot of difficulty for many people, to access, call it like self-custodial money and cryptocurrency, obviously, and NFTs or non-fungible assets to utilize in these games. And then not only to access them for the first time, but to secure them. So that's still a really significant hurdle that I think we've made a lot of progress in the last 2-3 years, but have a long way to go. The other, one other big one, there's many, but is the fact that if you're building a game or an app and you have a quote unquote economy or the notion of asset ownership, you're now not only managing, a gaming or app experience, but you're also managing, kind of like an economic asset or investment experience. And so, your customers aren't just customers of a game or experience, but they're financial customers. And you've seen many projects, gaming, profile pick, NFT projects, and others, struggle with the challenge of basically having different customer segments that you're managing. Those who love to play the game for the game's sake, those who are speculators. And so, you have multiple customer segments that aren't necessarily present in other types of apps. And so moving towards, one of the key goals for many projects now is moving towards economies that are somewhat more homogenous in terms of the types of player bases and their incentives.
Jan?
Okay, challenges. I think the most challenge people actually didn't pay attention is where the project get into a phase transition. I think phase transition come in two parts, right? So I think the first part is where you are transiting from fundraising to building. So, that's right start off the bat where, okay, I finished the fundraising, I have some money in the bank. Now I need to deliver, right? I need to operate, I need to maintenance, I need to run marketing events. So that's one phase transition. And this part, people do it quite okay, right? Because people know that, okay, I finished fundraising, I need to go into actual building the product. But the next step is where you're having the phase transition of where you want to bootstrapping from, let's say, your first 100 user to first 1,000, from first 1,000, 10,000, 10,000 to 1 million, and 1 million beyond. Because in this particular phase, we are looking at, for example, what work for 100, 1,000 user definitely will not work for 100,000 or million user on tokenomic side, right? So if you want to deliver your, let's say, a governance token to maybe 100,000 users, that's okay. But imagine that we don't design, let's say, Rainbow Sneaker or a classic, way of earning GMT, then we're facing tremendous difficulty of fair distributions of these tokens to a massive scale. And also, the level of security also change dramatically, right? If you have 100 to 1,000 user, it's not so much of an issue for you because the security level could be low. But if you have over a million users, the security become a huge factor. So that's with infrastructure plus the scalabilities. There are many products that you can build quite quickly to accommodate 100 to 1,000 data active users. But when it comes beyond to, let's say, 500,000 to a million data user, then you are talking about just totally different game on running the server and running everything. So that part, if we are looking at typical Web3, right? So if you can bootstrap user quite easily, then you are looking at exponential growth. And when you have the exponential growth, you also need whole level of different skill set. You don't have that in, let's say, your toolbox, you're in definite trouble. I think that part is many projects probably will find out too late. And that's the huge, I think, challenge.
Yeah, I want to call back what Jason kind of said. Well, he didn't really say agility, but I think that's basically what kind of he meant. And I think that's extremely important, which is like a lot of the Web3 game developers, they care about like, delivering extremely delicate games, almost like 85 or 90 points. But I think at the end, the gist is really like about like you ship. Like you want to get out of the market as soon as possible, show to people, and then get responses and get feedback immediately, and you go. So I think it's we are for Steppen, for Gas Hero, we are both trying to go with that. I mean, obviously for Gas Hero, we are much better supplied with the resources, so we can do better. But I do think being agile it's one of the most important factor for a lot of the builders. So I want to maybe pivot a little bit. I want to still kind of go back to a little bit about Gas Heroes, and then step back to ask some high level questions. So Jan, I would like to ask you a very quick one. So will Gas Hero be available for mobile only or desktop as well? This is sourced from one of the community members on Twitter.
Sure. Actually, Gas Hero will be made available on both mobile and desktop platform, if necessary. Yeah.
Any thinking behind that, or is that just like for the sake of getting more people to use it?
I think have a wider accessibility is always be nice, but I will assume most of the people will access the mobile end.
Got it. Makes sense. So yeah, let's go back to some of the high level discussions. So Jason, here's a question for you. So what genre of the games do you think are most feasible to be put on chain, and why?
Well, I think feasibility is let me put it differently, is what game genres can leverage Web3 features the most? And I think, it necessarily has to do with money, because that's kind of what Web3 really enables. So you have to put money in there in one way or another. If it's not money, it's some encapsulation of money. It's a value carrier. And then secondly, I think the genre has to be necessarily social and PvP, because that's where the value transfer on Web3 becomes the most relevant. Whether it's status, it's a sense of accomplishment, it's greed, or any sort of human weaknesses and emotion. Those weaknesses and emotion in social setting is the sort of most powerful venues for actual consumption versus investment. And spending is what really powers some of these games. When a game is necessarily social and PvP, it's also where the network effect and scale really apply. So, token incentives can really help drive the user growth and reduce CAC. I think it can be lower production value. That's not a genre question, so I'll skip that. It probably needs to be mobile, so you want a large enough audience such that the economies that the game is built on can have a largest value capture through take rate. And there are, so if we were to summarize it, it's sort of, mobile kind of first, lower production value, social and PvP genre that has a big enough economy and necessarily deal with money. There aren't that many categories that fit this. It's probably MMO, it's probably MOBA, it's FPS, it's gambling genres, it's dress-up games with NFTs. And in particular, I think this alpha here is, I think the MMOs where it's simulation and strategy in nature can naturally make a comeback. Because the ARPU for those games historically have been quite low with a niche audience, but that's because the power dynamics and the policy setting power in those games don't necessarily translate to anything outside of in-game social statuses. But just imagine if it actually directs capital, and ascending to higher ranks means monetary gains or losses even on your worst enemies. I think the ARPU in that kind of setting or that kind of simulation game necessarily skyrockets, and I think that's a huge opportunity.
I like the point
Great.
you made about. Yeah, Mike, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to be really brief because I'm, interestingly enough, so I'm not the gaming partner at Six Man Ventures. My partners Aaron and Serge are, but I could just speak to areas, very similar to Jason, but areas that I'm like passionate about are, things related again to sports and competition, where people are already wagering, maybe wagering on professional teams, but now can, wager in in-game economies where they're playing, themselves. I think the, NFL Rivals game that was recently released is like one of the first like fun ones where you can basically buy NFTs with higher points and level up and earn them. And there's a real economy developing there. And then obviously, casino games is the one right now where we're seeing a little bit of breakout, and we're going to see more interesting economies develop there, where it's not just you playing versus the house, but where, there's going to be like probability protocols where things are minted or burned based on you winning or losing a bet. The last thing I'll say is things that haven't been gamed, previously. Obviously, Steppen was a phenomenal example of that, and is a phenomenal example of that with moving. We invested in a sleep and earn company with a really unique model, but behaviors that can be gamified that haven't historically been will be, and so I'm really excited about that area.
That's super interesting. I think some of the points that you guys made about, I think I also earlier pointed out, which is like people kind of playing game theories against each other, right? And then also the PvP component versus like the players are all like playing against the game being a house. I think all are very interesting. I do have additional kind of follow-up question. I would love to hear your take, because this is definitely something that's very controversial for a lot of people. What do you think of free to play in Web3 world? I think different people definitely have different answers. Jan, do you want to maybe take a stab on this one?
Sure. Free to play. So, as I was actually talk about this is that in any of economy you need to have a demand and supply, and free to play is where you are most likely going to generate things that through, let's say, a grinding or some form of repetition. And then you have say, okay, now I probably can liquidate this, right? So then you will give, let's say the high roller or the people that actually want to spend, they become like in any of the society, right? They be the people that paying the most of the tax, right? So they are basically supporting, maybe one big player will support hundreds of free-to-play users. But the issue is that they have to create some form of value, right? To have people contributing. But if you start from free to play, then the question will be there most likely going to be people that wanted to sell rather than want to buy, and that causes I think some of the initial trouble with the free to play.
Jason, you may have some different take. What's your opinion?
My answer is pretty simple. Like, free to play is great, but pay to earn is necessary, and marginal cost on valuable production is also very necessary.
How about Mike? Anything to add here?
So my big take is that, like, I think if you want to attract a new set of gamers, a new set of people, which very well may be necessary with some of like the legacy resistance to NFT and Web3 enabled gaming, you're going to need to appeal to people who maybe haven't historically been power gamers, people like me. And I don't love to shell out, a bunch of money up front to, basically try an experience. So, I think the notion of like, free to play, it's compelling to me. it has hooked me, for example, on the NFL Rivals game. And I've found that, it really, the notion that I can resell some of my assets changes my personal psychology dynamics from I'm grinding to, I'm earning. But, all evidence over the past 2 to 3 years, if you look at things like Axie and whatnot, says that, it's hard to keep those things sustainable and not turn into grind economies. So I'm responding more from a perspective of one than a really thoughtful framework, because I just don't have quite the learned knowledge and experience of you, Jason and Jan.
Cool.
Can I just add in one more point?
Yeah, of course. Go.
From a purely operational perspective, if we allow, let's say, a free-to-play game, let's define free is the monetary perspective free. Then you probably also have to deal with a little bit of the botting issue, because people can free access to your platform, for example. And then they potentially might be issue with botting or hacking in some case, if it is not an ungated or some form of gated event. Then you can actually reduce the issue with botting.
So your point is, you have to basically put enough friction to avoid, basically botting and effectively unacceptable or economy ruining behavior, but not so much that the friction becomes too high for the average person to pick it up.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to comment on another point, which is I think in a relatively successfully designed Web3 game, usually all the users should have some sort of resources or goals they want to optimize, and they should have the willingness to exchange with each other. And I think that's really where the value, meaning that I think for some people, if they want to earn, they might have to invest. But for some other people who are optimizing for other aspects, they may have other way of contributing their labor instead of just purely investing in stuff. And I think that's where the dynamic can be kept. I think that's kind of where also Jan was coming from. But I guess now that we've talked quite a bit about some of these high level discussions, that I think it paved the road of us building Gas Heroes, I would like to maybe fire some community questions to Jan now. So I think the first one, are you thinking to connect all FSL games in one portal, all in one place ecosystem where we can have games, infos, raffles, results, leaderboard, event details all in one place? This is one for Jan, also from community.
All in one place. I think there are many solutions to this outcome, right? So one being solution is everything is connected to GMT, right? So all product have some form of access to GMT or consumption of GMT or circulations of GMT. And actually, me and Jerry have this interesting conversation last night about consolidating, right? I think we are actually looking to building something, right, to consolidate all our product features.
Understood.
But then, you're gonna take some time, right? So we're building a range of different things. So
I thought you were gonna quote your favorite line, which is all the games are, all the products are separate, but then all the operations are kind of working with each other. But anyway, cool. I'll continue with the other question, which also sourced from the community. With the resource pack and Gas Hero badge, it seems that you will be able to buy power. What mechanics will be in place for a small fish to be able to compete? Wow, this is a perpetual question that comes back for every single game that has become large. So definitely interesting.
Yes. I mean, in the brief discussion of Gas Hero, we did introduce, the concept of, the power, wealth, and fame. And this is actually a quite accurate replica of what happened in the real world, right? And I was actually just binge watching, the Matrix, and one line actually caught me, explaining, what power is, and in actually word, right? So the power refer to something that other people doesn't. So you have power over the other person because you can act in the best way versus other people, and it's quite easy to understand. The fame, which being the social influence, or the wealth being, how much money you have. So coming back to the question where, say, small fishes, if you don't want to invest a huge amount of money, then that's the reason we call it a social Web3 game. That's where you can establish your social influence in the game and use the social influence to exchange power and wealth. And we're trying to fix the struggle of power, wealth, and fame. We talk about the triangle relationship between power, wealth, and fame. And these are all exchangeable in the game. I think that's definitely, we want to create pathway for success for, everyone, not just people chucking money into the game.
Yep, that's also what I meant earlier about by if people have like different resources that we're trying to optimize for, then they should be able to exchange with each other. And I think that really makes a game interesting because people can struggle for different things under the rules. Another question coming from the community, you strongly said the game will not produce GMT like Step-In. So will Gah Hero be a play to earn? Nice question.
Okay, so it is a form of play to earn, but you are earning from other players, right? So actually, we have also the sort of a similar thought, when we, design or talk about design of a Step-In product. So basically, it is where people contributing, GMT into either a PvP or different form of, pools or contributions, and then they will compete against each other to win, that pool. That's where the strategy come from. So when we say it's a social strategy Web3 game, the social refer to where we just said about intrapable of your social influence versus wealth and power. And then this is where we refer that if you can draft a best strategy that you win, then you are winning other people's GMT and pop. So we also run different event or marketing activities. So it'll be a mix of earnings.
Cool. Right. I hope this clarifies something that people have been discussing quite a bit about. And definitely look forward. If people wanted to learn more, definitely stay tuned with the white paper update. The second part of the white paper is going to be released on the 25th of this month. So definitely stay tuned. You only have a week. So look forward. So I'd like to switch gear a little bit and then ask some questions to our investors. So Mike and Jason, as of today, many NFT projects are trying really hard on their utilities. We've seen this whole Zuki saga, and obviously, Pudgy Penguin has been doing quite well, and some of the other ones. There were also projects like CryptoPunks that were simply collectibles who try to maintain themselves with, doing nothing, being, the kind of quote unquote Bitcoin of NFT. So what's your view on these projects' future path could look like? Either start with, I think, Mike, if you don't mind.
Happy to start. So basically, if we're to look back, I think at what happened with, the PFP phenomenon of the past 3 years. Obviously, CryptoPunks was created before that, but, sort of the frenzy started in late 2020 with NBA Top Shot and, CryptoKitties before that. But bottom line, we had, a multi-year period of, exuberant, call it, offering, launch, secondary trading, and multiple drops of tokens and, derivative NFTs and projects and, sort of like supply dilution. But, ultimately, if we're to look back, it resembles, this sort of PFP craze resembles, I would say, what happened during the ICO phase, where you just had incredible amounts of money raised, most of it likely in a fairly non-dilutive way, with most of it likely to, end up, pretty close to zero. but call it handful or probably more than a handful of projects that are, doing and will continue to do really, really interesting things. Things like Yuga Labs / Bored Ape Yacht Club. I still believe Azuki will build out a really interesting franchise. Pudgy Penguins and others, right? I don't have to name them all. Day Gods will do interesting things. What has happened, however, is the quote unquote customer has viewed most PFP projects as speculative assets. And the playbook was to sell these speculative assets at a very high primary dollar value. Again, maybe sell a second or third series as well after that. And the returns to date over a 2-year period have been really underwhelming for most projects, which has led to a lot of unhappy quote unquote customers. So people who purchase the NFTs, if they were to be honest with themselves and have sort of self-responsibility and ownership, would say, hey, they did this on a speculative basis, but at the same time would have credible claims that many of the projects did offer, roadmaps and visions of, things that would follow, metaverses and, games and exclusive experiences and events. And, I would say 90% of the projects that promised that, didn't actually deliver, never really had a clear vision, and made up the business models after they did the NFT offerings. I launched an NFT project myself, or an NFT enabled project called LinksDAO, where we actually did deliver. And it's because we actually had a product in mind, a very specific one when we launched the project, which was we're going to buy a golf course and create an incredible golf community. So anyway, too few projects did that. And I think they marred the word NFT in the minds of a lot of people. The good news is it feels like we're past that phase. If you tried to launch a new PFP project today, you probably wouldn't sell out, or it would have to be free. Just the market's not really interested anymore, and sort of people have gone away. So anyway, the learnings here are, there's in these speculative, euphoric, crypto mania times, a lot of things that are released that are of not significantly high value, but people are speculating, they dream, and they get wrecked. Out of that, some other really interesting things do emerge utilizing the same technology. Again, Yuga Labs, I think they're building something interesting. Futureverse is building a really interesting metaverse. And then you find use cases that actually kicked off the genre. You mentioned CryptoPunks, but CryptoPunks effectively is art now. There's no promised utility. We saw art blocks launch, and the entire genre of generative art has launched. And it looks like, that has staying power and is really interesting. And, what we found is, things like art and gaming assets have, moved online into a global market where anyone can transact without restriction. That's the ultimate innovation. But it hasn't changed how much is actually valuable, right? So what I mean is there's an abundance. There's tens of millions or hundreds of millions of NFTs that are out there in the world. And as ever, there's a very limited subset of that is extremely valuable, and a very, limited subset of use cases and frankly, teams that have proven themselves to be exceptional. So it's almost like same as it ever was in hindsight. But wow, it's been a hell of a mania in between.
Very nice, very nice. I love to hear this. Actually, I felt like I'm learning quite a bit. I'm curious about Jason's answer, because you must have a lot of views on this one.
Most NFTs are worthless. NFT is a feature, not a product. Nobody will call themselves NFT projects in a couple of years. They use NFT for stuff within it. Pure NFTs are there to offer luxury and experience, and it's a Veblen good. And most founders are not built out to build fashion companies or luxury companies. NFT without utility just goes to zero.
I love that Jason can basically say in 1/10 the time in much crisper words what I was trying to say. but he's dead right. And we even the LinksDAO case study is exactly that, right? We launched as a NFT enabled golf DAO, and in reality, what we are is an incredibly well aligned membership community of individuals who bought a golf course and are going to buy a bunch more.
I think a lot of the NFTs will resemble LinkedIn in the future. It's like it became increasingly more obvious.
I think if you talk about this kind of things in 2022, people is going to call you savage. I think now people are going to tell you truth of being intellectual or something. But I'm curious, like if Jan has anything to comment because I do have something. But if Jan you have, let's go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when I first see NFT and then you see this huge, like huge pump, and then you start to question yourself, say, hold on a second, maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe this is bad. And then when you see the price go down, say, okay, actually I'm right. So I think people have to go through that phase where ultimately I think sometimes I think even the intuition actually work quite well, right? If you think this is something doesn't make sense, maybe it doesn't make sense, right? But it doesn't affect people that participate, and actually made it. And also I want to comment on what Mike was saying that the whole I think crypto is a giant PvP game in a sense. There's some, yes, we can definitely say, okay, we are heading to the right direction or a better future, but there are also a lot of zero-sum games in the crypto space.
Yeah, I was going to comment that I think you guys didn't mention, but I do think the space is going to commoditize quite a bit. I think Jan previously held a view on that most of the NFTs are going to be very cheap. And primarily, something like, the Stephen sneakers today, right? Like it's like the Stephen sneakers today are pretty much the commoditized NFTs. And I think, there's going to be a lot more around that too. And I think another interesting commentary that I received in the community was that people were talking about how I actually didn't think of this when we, kind of come up with this idea about community UGC co-creation campaign. But someone else told me that, like you guys are basically creating a utility for the users first and invite them to generate the NFT there, which is a reversal kind of way of doing the project. I know, Jason, you don't like people call it NFT projects, but just bear with me for now. Like I think most of the other NFT projects are still thinking about like, how do I become an IP? But exactly, it is so hard to become an IP, right? Like today, Pudgy Penguin only does the what do you call it, the merch. Like merch is not going to sell that much, but it's going to be profitable for them. But the reason that people are buying them is because they have a really nice group of people who are creating a lot of interesting either you call it memes or maybe like animations on Instagram. Like I like to scroll the Pudgy Penguin Instagram like all the time just because of that. So I think it's usually very hard, and I'm gonna say that given that the whole, I think generally speaking, the trend is going to commoditizing. We are going to see a lot more, application first and then NFT. And NFT is just created for the use cases, and then being, visually appealing is going to be a must. It's almost like one of the, bare minimum that you have to fulfill. So that's my take here. I know I spent a lot of time on this one, but I really feel I wanted to talk about this. One last question before we close this, and I think this is also something that a lot of our audiences were interested, which is where Gah Hero is going to launch, meaning which chain. But we're not giving away this one yet. But Jason and Mike, what chain are you seeing application builders planning to build on the most? And then what's the proportion between building on a dedicated app chain versus a generalized layer one? I'm curious about this. Jason, go ahead.
The group that I see will be very different from Mike's, so we probably get different opinions. The ones that I see in Asia are predominantly EVM, plus a centralized design like Steppen. Because no one's launching on Aptos or Stray, by the way. I think it's the safety of assets coupled with a seamless friction on internal transfer. And for any serious folks that want to have a 1 million DAU app today, that is the only solution that works. They're not going to build it on something that's not battle tested, potentially unsafe, and prone to bugs. And that's the app chains that we're talking about. So for now, it's layer one, if especially Ethereum, at worst maybe Polygon, Arbitrum, and then plus their own centralized design.
Mike?
Yeah. So I would say we don't differ as much in what we're seeing. in terms of EVM, we obviously have invested in quite a few Solana-based games of different types. But to Jason's point, we have actually seen a little bit or invested a bit more in games building on, for example, L2s like Arbitrum and Polygon. One thing I'll say is just gaming in general. So I tend to agree. It's unclear what the right answer is going to be in terms of kind of like which chain to build on. Whether, by the way, it's easy to migrate or not. I think, frankly, you guys have proven that you can operate on multiple chains and different environments. So, I think we focus less on where the building is happening, as long as it's like meets our minimum threshold of an ecosystem that has users. And to Jason's point, we definitely see chains where nobody's building. But I would say Solana, there's not a ton of L1 building I'm seeing. It's a lot of EVM based L2 roll up gaming that we see. And so the one thing I will say, though, is that we're looking a little bit differently at gaming investments now than anything else. We're actually basically doing effectively, call it half the check size and twice the number of investments, because it actually feels a bit more hit-driven and significant supply of projects versus other areas that we're investing in crypto.
Cool. So in a different angle to ask you, Jan. So you as a founder and builder yourself, what's your view on these questions? How do you choose? Or how would you choose?
I mean, when we're making any decisions, right? So we always looking at how practical it is to build a certain, let's say, layer one. I mean, for us to build anything on layer one, we really have to look at, do they have a sort of infrastructure ready, right? So I like to take an analogy, say if you're building a city, then you need to have a sewage, you need to have the electricity, you have all the basics, right? So in this case, if you're building an app, the app doesn't just exist alone, right? Do you have a wallet, right? If the wallet is battle tested or easy to use, and do you have a DEX where there's volumes? Do you have, let's say, a marketplace for NFTs? So on and so forth. And there are also, this is only the front end, right? There are many, many things like a back end. Let's say, for example, we're building on Solana, right? So we have to actually building indexers ourselves. So example like this, we have to also taking into the consideration. Plus, definitely, while the transaction speed be up to the requirement of the product. Does the product have high frequency or high need of transaction, or we can batch it, or we can move something offline or off chain, or we can say can we somewhat optimize it to the requirement of the game. So definitely a lot of things we're looking at. It has to be really practical, and also I think I always talk about the layer one and people joke me on this. But I also want to say this again. If we type into any of the layer one ecosystems, we also are tapping into additional potential users. Giving another typical example would be the Solana one, that where you have the Solana, let's say Maxi, where they say, I will not use anything other than Solana, right? And there will be definitely Maxi on other layer ones, where they say, I'm not moving away from my supported layer one. So you practically cannot tap into this ecosystem if you are not building on this layer one. So I think picking a layer one that have all this practical requirement and also have a pretty healthy user base or a Maxi user base will definitely, the criteria we're looking at.
I kind of want to echo on one thing that you mentioned, which is accessibility. I think most of the teams that are building applications, it's quite hard for them to really, say if you're building an application, you actually build out an indexer yourself or some sort of thing. So I think the accessibility for users is going to be very important, meaning that I think if you have users can have access to the token, multiple centralized exchanges or like DEXs, that's going to make a very, very different, very big difference. So I definitely agree with you. It's at the end, it's really, really pragmatic kind of angles from the builder's perspective. So I think it'll be interesting to watch, like, going forward. But for people who want to know where we are going to deploy on, I think it'll be interesting to see like what people would tweet about, like, guessing where we are going to deploy on. So I'm not going to leak here. And any final words from you guys, I guess, like in terms of anything, from the above questions or, discussions that you felt like you wanted to add. If not, I have a few very interesting alphas to leak. Well, maybe not really alpha, but before that, let me check in with all of you. Do you have any other questions you want to chat about? Okay, no one.
I'm good. Leak the alpha.
Yeah, alpha. I don't even know what alpha is.
Okay, really? Okay.
I'm
Jason,
nervous.
Okay, Jason, how about you?
What alpha?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I don't have any.
It's not alpha for you guys, but people tune in this for a reason, right? Why do they like tolerate us until now? I'm just gonna say that I think I'd like to share about like what the second part of white paper is going to about, but without leaking the content. But definitely wanted to stay tuned for people who are watching what's coming out. So I think in this part of the white paper, you'll see the numbers of the cities, the districts, the guilds, the clans bases. You'll find out what each of these terms mean, the ones that I mentioned above in the white paper. And then it is what we call the structure of the world inside the Gas Hero. You'll find out the concept of settlement. And then you'll learn about the cities inside Gas Hero, what those are. And finally, you'll learn about the buildings inside the structure that I mentioned above. I think although I only mentioned, some of the structures of the things, that I think people who are familiar with certain gaming genre, they can already start speculating how we're designing the game. So I think that's it for, the alpha for today. But definitely thank you guys so much for, tuning in. The one last thing that I'd like to, let everyone know is the Zeely password. Actually, let me type. I'm actually looking through my Slack. Okay, so the password is, 1 second. All capitalized Stephen, STEPN. The Zeely quest for the Gas Hero AMA, the password is capitalized STEPN. I've already repeated twice, so I think we're good. But yeah, and I would like to thank all of you who joined and support us for this AMA. This is the kickoff AMA that we held with Jason from Folius Ventures and Mike from 6 Month Ventures, and as well as Jan himself. So thank you guys all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Watch Matrix.
What the hell? I was gonna cue you. Like Jerry is not here, so then like you you dare to say about layer 1 like.
I signed my free. Yeah. Layer 1 like. Okay.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jan. I think we're gonna log off.
Okay. See ya.
Cheers. Bye-bye.